christiangeekcentral.com.
Soundbite culture. With TV, especially with like 24-hour news networks and then just any kind of like interview talk show type format, the best soundbite wins. You know, if there's two opposing views, then it's kind of like whoever has the snappiest retort or whatever. It's really, I mean, I really hate to see important issues being dealt with and discussed in a format that's like 3 talking heads and you've got 10 minutes. And even with podcasts, you know, that have variable lengths, people talking about something like that, they're not going to want to talk about it forever. There's going to come a point where they're going to be like, okay, this is exhausted. And you might not get the strongest representation of all the views in that format. For me, for example, I mean, if you wanted to like jump on a live format like this and just have some kind of like question about the Bible or some hard issue of faith or the Bible or theology or whatever, and kind of go, you know, so there, what do you think of that, you know? At that point, I just have to be like, okay, well, call me Pater Strawman Franson, you know, at that point, because I just don't have the memory to recall all the books that I've read and the points that have been made on that topic by people far more educated than I am. And so what you're going to get from me is just a really weak representation of the alternate point of view. You know, if that satisfies you to just kind of get in the last word there, then okay, I'm good for that. I can help you with that, you know. But I mean, if we're wanting to seek out the truth of something, if you're really wanting to seek out the truth of a matter, I think that the podcast format, as much as I would want to promote my own podcast, the podcast format, the Talking Heads format in a 1-hour thing on History Channel or whatever, it's not the format for seeking truth. You know, the format for seeking truth is like this ongoing return to the issue in question, checking up on what the latest information is. I think that's a much better way to... Is he gonna kill me? Oh my gosh, I gotta get out of here. I didn't save, it's been a long time, it's been way too long. Oh my gosh, guys, you're supposed to tell me to save. Just kidding, it's not your job. I suck. Am I predestined to beat Final Fantasy II? There's a clever way to answer that, but it's not quite formulating in my head. So here's what I'll try to say it. Yes, I was predestined to beat Final Fantasy II, because I've beaten this game already. It's been a long, long time, which is why I'm returning to it now. Well, that's not between the manuscript. It's interesting, I think that we like watching programs that talk about things, important issues, in an incomplete manner, because we can then insert our own, like, closing statements, closing thoughts. We can say, well, he didn't get to say this. Oh, that's so frustrating. Da-da-da-da-da. You know, and we're kind of in it for the combat, and to see if our viewpoint wins the debate or whatever, you know. Or, you know, we go and we kind of feel satisfied because we feel like our side, okay, they made good points, and, you know, and we can kind of feel self-satisfied in that. And even if we're in the right as far as our view, I'm not sure that's a great use of our time. You know, but it generates interest, it generates clicks, it generates views. You know, these kinds of heated, poorly explored discussions of important issues. It generates conversation. You know, even if you're not looking to generate controversy, it generates conversation when you cover something or talk about a topic in an incomplete way. And, you know, I certainly drop the ball enough, but I try when I'm dealing with a specific topic to consider all the, you know, potential counter-arguments as much as possible, you know, and cover it as well as I can. But sometimes I wonder, should I do that? I mean, should I be maybe not covering it as completely, so specifically so that someone can say, but you didn't mention this, and then that generates discussion. Let's say you and I wanted to have a conversation about predestination or whatever. I would much prefer, and, you know, I do this in the YouTube comments, when somebody, like, brings up something, and usually in a somewhat combative manner, not always, but that seems to be the trend. When someone brings up something, where they are coming from a very different place from me. Often what I'll do, especially if I sense that their attitude is not one of like they really want to have a fruitful exchange, but sometimes even if they are approaching it really well, but it's just like that's a rabbit hole. What I'll recommend is that they, it's like, hey, yeah, I'd love to talk about that with you. Here's my email address, because I feel like email is a much better place for those kinds of discussions. And I'll tell you why. Because in comment sections, no matter where you are, that is a public forum. And I've noticed in my own character, and I believe I've detected it in others, but I can't know, I'm not a mind reader, so I can only ultimately speak for myself. But I've noticed for myself that when I have an audience and I'm talking to somebody about something and we disagree on the issue, it's harder for me to listen to them and not just move straight to how can I counter that. It's hard for me to listen and actually consider. I'm much more likely to stay in a mode of how can I counter that? How can I show that they're wrong? And how is that good for me and how is that good for them? So I much prefer one-on-one email conversations that can potentially go on for a long time until, one or both of us just feels like it's not going anywhere anymore, But I feel like that's a lot more fruitful of a medium to have an exchange about contrasting views on any given issue. It's just way too easy in comment sections to feel that desire, I think, to get in the last word or be right or be seen as right or whatever, I just don't think we listen as well in those public formats. Even though we don't think of them as public formats, they are public formats, So, am I listening now? It's hard to listen right now because I'm playing games and trying to talk about things at the same... See, this is a terrible medium for talking about things of value and worth. But here's why I still do that here or on the podcast or wherever. Because, like you said, Francisco, they are good primers for discussion, or better yet, they are primers for an investigation into truth. So my hope is that, anytime I'm talking about something on a podcast or some issue gets touched on here, that, the real good that I think could come of that, and why am I on this screen? To check health. The real good, the greatest good that possibly that can come from that is for someone to feel like either convicted about something, like bothered because they're feeling defensive about their view, and so maybe they need to kind of search out some more information, or maybe it's not a feeling of defensiveness, maybe it's some other feeling that was triggered that just makes them kind of want to I want to dig into that a little bit more. That's what I think is the greatest good that's likely to come out of those kinds of incomplete conversations with talking heads or on a video game stream or on a podcast or whatever, is that it will lead to that person then going off by themselves and seeking out truth on that issue and just trying to find out what both sides have to say. I would really love to get a recommendation preferably from an atheist who's not angry. I want your go-to guy among atheist philosophers, because every time I see material written online by an atheist thinker, or it's very rare that I'll dip into, I'll actually buy a book by an atheist, but I read the first chapter of a book by Dawkins, and I was just like, God, man, this guy is not doing the atheist position any favors. And maybe Dawkins fans think that his arguments are airtight or whatever, but he speaks so far out of his realm of education, and speaks as though he has authority on matters of philosophy, and he's really in my view, a poor philosopher. And by philosopher, I don't mean someone that talks about lofty issues in really abstract ways that have no relevance to the real world. I think that's kind of the way we view philosophers today, is they just talk about these really interesting ideas that are just totally irrelevant to everyday life. A philosopher, a studier of truth, a studier of knowledge, a philosopher is someone that looks for answers to the big questions by combining knowledge gained from multiple disciplines. But I'd really like to hear from like a thoughtful atheist who is not snarky and more of a stand-up comedian who's just kind of taking jabs at the alternate view because he thinks so little of it. I'd like to go, like, who is the guy? Like, the best in the field at with a calm and cool head, without being insulting, in a very reasonable fashion, defends the atheist viewpoint. I want to know what the best arguments are, because when I like hear quotes from Dawkins, or I think Christopher Hitchens is maybe another one. A lot of these guys, when I see stuff of theirs, it's like, this is stand-up comedy. They're going for jokes here, and it sounds like some, you know, videos or audio clips or whatever, you know, from freaky Christian pastors that are preaching to the choir, in a manner of speaking. Although in my experience, the choir definitely needs preaching to. And I mean that literally. I used to be a worship pastor, so our choir needed some solid preaching at the time. Yeah, it is hard to say anything of coherence and worth while you're trying to play a video game with even just a little bit of strategy required from your mind. Burn! Ha ha ha! Power!
Christiangeekcentral.com